Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. A deal to end the government shutdown could be taking shape in the Senate, but anything that emerges still has to win support in Congress. And the Speaker of the House has been saying repeatedly there's nothing more to negotiate. Here this morning to discuss that and more is Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander. Representative, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
So the one thing we seem to have a surplus of in Washington right now is finger pointing over the government shutdown. Senate Democrats have voted repeatedly against the so-called clean continuing resolution that would reopen the government without any kind of side deal on health care. But obviously, as people go back and forth here, Democrats are saying this is all the Republicans' fault. How can that be the case?
You know, I'm really not interested in finger pointing. I'm interested in finding a path, which I believe is there, to reopen our government and to protect the health care of millions of people across our country and tens of thousands of people across the state of New Hampshire. Look, Adam, when you look at the federal budget, it is overwhelmingly, healthcare is at the center of how we spend taxpayer dollars. We spend more on healthcare than any other developed country in the world. And what we've seen this year since I've been in this job have been a series of decisions that have jacked up healthcare costs for everybody in this state. Whether you are a single mom with 2 kids who's trying to navigate right now skyrocketing premiums, whether you're a small business owner who's really, it's been a rough week for so many people in our state who are trying to absorb the shock of what's gone live for so many people who get their health care on the marketplace. I really believe we've got a path, and this is not a partisan issue, preventing the death spiral that will ensue if we don't protect healthcare for the American people. And I don't believe it's a partisan issue to get the government reopened. It's the most fundamental and basic responsibility of the United States Congress and of the President of the United States to pass a budget for this country. That's what hardworking families across this state do, and that's what our job is at the federal level.
You know, what you're getting at here and how Democrats have tried to portray themselves over the last decade plus is sort of saying, hey, we're the adults in the room here in Washington. But doesn't it seem a little disingenuous to bemoan DOGE at the beginning of the year and all the chaos that's being caused with these cuts and then turn around at the end of the year and have federal workers not being paid for more than a month?
You know, look, Adam, just to step back for a second, the Speaker of the House shut down the House of Representatives 50 days ago, before the federal government shut down. 50 days ago, he shut down the House. On that day, I voted for a budget that would have protected against a death spiral in health care costs, that would have lowered costs for New Hampshire. The Speaker decided to proceed directly towards a shutdown of the House of Representatives, and he has stood firm in that position, which is so wildly irresponsible. He repeats again and again that the job of the House of Representatives is done when the government is shut down. And I gotta tell you, it's very, very hard. This is a human business where we've gotta be working together. And many of my colleagues have been under instructions not to return to Washington. My Republican colleagues, they're taking paychecks while federal workers aren't being paid and doing some of the hardest jobs that we could ask anyone to do. This is dead wrong. All the incentives are out of whack. My deeply held belief is that no member of Congress should be paid during a shutdown. That is why I am not accepting a paycheck and why I am supporting federal legislation to prevent members of Congress from being paid when the government is shut down, and a constitutional amendment that will protect that too, because at the end of the day, this is the most basic job we've got, and I know that there are people of good faith who want to get to the table and get this done, and that's what I'm focused on doing, Adam.
If a deal gets done on the ACA tax credits, as you noted, we're in the enrollment period right now. Are Democrats contending that costs will go down right away, that people who have signed up will somehow see a better deal? Is that even possible?
It is, because of the way that we've structured this. Look, this is... It seems like a lifetime ago, but a few short months ago in July, the president rammed through the United States Congress the biggest cuts to health care in American history. Here in New Hampshire, our health care system is under unprecedented stress. You know, last night I was up in Plymouth at a critical access hospital, and I heard there what I've heard at hospitals and community health centers across our state. The system really cannot bear these drastic cuts, which, by the way, are all being, the money that we're saving in healthcare is being used to fund the biggest tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations that we've seen in my lifetime. Now, at the end of the day, the ACA tax credits, the marketplace, is one piece of the healthcare puzzle in the state of New Hampshire, but it's a critically important one. So, you know, as I was saying before, whether you talk to families who are seeing skyrocketing premiums, we're talking about thousands of dollars in additional healthcare costs a year. They just can't afford this. So what happens? They're going to go without healthcare. And what does that do to the system? You know, last night in Plymouth at this critical access hospital, the ACA tax credits alone, if we don't extend them, it's going to be a hit of more than $1 million to this critical access hospital. This is putting in peril lifelines for our rural communities here in New Hampshire. And it's the same story in our cities, where people, small businesses, just cannot afford these jacked up costs. And this is all preventable. And that's why you see people who I don't agree with on a whole lot of things. My initials are MTG. There's another MTG in the United States Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's one of many Republicans who hasn't had much to say about the Affordable Care Act that's positive in recent years. She spent a lot of energy trying to destroy it, but if anyone who is coming to this honestly and in good faith has got to acknowledge that if we don't take action now to extend these tax credits or sunset them, and you know, some say sunset, some say extend. I'm not focused on the words. I'm focused on actually protecting the health care that millions of people across our country rely on, and that are a lifeline for small businesses and farmers across the state.
Rural health care is certainly a topic I think we're going to be talking about a lot in the year ahead, but I want to get to something that happened last Tuesday. Big wins for Democrats in Virginia and New Jersey. A lot of people are also talking about that win for Zohran Mamdani as the mayor of New York City. Do you think this is where your party is headed? Do you see Zohran Mamdani as someone who is the future of the Democratic Party?
You know, what I saw on Tuesday here in New Hampshire and across our country were people who stepped up and who are focused on the issues that matter to our state. And right now we are in the thick of a cost crisis, an affordability crisis, where, you know, whether you're trying to buy a home, which it's never been more expensive, and you take a look at home prices, at rental costs across our state, they're through the roof. You know, up in some parts of our state by 300%. This is a cornerstone of the American dream, and it is out of reach for far too many people. This is, to me, Adam, it's the existential and critical crisis of our time to address the cost crisis. It's true of healthcare. Healthcare is a huge piece of the cost crisis. Energy costs, you go down the line, childcare, transportation costs, you know, you go down the line, food costs, which are top of mind right now here in New Hampshire, where we've got tens of thousands of families who have been put in a horrendous position because of choices that this president has made to attack hardworking people who are trying to put food on the table and who are trying to live their lives with dignity and with some measure of security. I think what we saw on Tuesday were two of my colleagues in Congress who were successful in their races for governor in Virginia and New Jersey. You know, these are two women who I've loved working with from the moment I met them, because they are focused on doing the work, they're focused on the mission, and they're focused on what matters to people. And at the end of the day, that is what our government should be about. And that's the spirit I'm trying to bring to this work.
The cost of living was also the message for Mayor-elect Mamdani, but just 4 years ago, he was talking about, quote, the end goal of seizing the means of production. That is textbook Marxism. Is this someone you want to associate with?
You know, I respect that he's focused on affordability and cost of living, but I also acknowledge that New York City is very different from the state of New Hampshire. And look, in doing this work, I really believe governing is a team effort. And I really believe that in America today, we need less polarization. We need bigger tents. We need more people under the tent rowing in the same direction. And so I wish anyone who is in a position of public trust, really, I wish them I wish them nothing but the best, because in this country right now, we need people who are stepping up and focused on the mission. But that's my orientation. And what I can tell you, what I saw here in New Hampshire, it was an amazing day for the state, that we had people stepping up from Nashua all the way up to Berlin, who are doing some of the hardest jobs. It's never been a harder time to serve in a position of public trust. You know, there are threats of violence that like we've never seen before. And I was really encouraged to see voters coming out and people stepping up to do some of the hardest jobs we can ask them to do.
I do want to
on our
sneak in
school
one
boards.
last question here before we wrap up on ICE, right? Obviously, in 2024, voters collectively endorsed a more aggressive approach to deport illegal immigrants. Perhaps not so many of them were on board with what we're seeing now with, the latest story in Chicago, this woman who was dragged out of a daycare from the infant room who allegedly had work papers. So I'm just curious, if you can, in about a minute's time, tell us what changes do you want to see with ICE if and when Democrats regain power?
Look, public safety depends on public trust. And what we see happening right now in this state and across our country are people wearing masks, carrying crowbars around, without identification, without any sense from the citizen or from, as I've observed it, and I know, I'm sure all of your viewers have seen these videos coming out of cities across the country. This is no way to run a government. I'm deeply concerned about the ways in which law enforcement has been weaponized against the American people, and I'm worried about it because I believe deeply in the mission of law enforcement. I believe in the rule of law, and there's nothing worse. There's nothing more dangerous to public safety than eroding public trust, which is why I'm supporting legislation to make sure we have the kind of transparency that the American people need so that we can rebuild that trust. We shouldn't have police running around in masks on the street carrying crowbars. It's just not something that we should be seeing here in the state of New Hampshire or in our country today.
All right, Congresswoman Goodlander, thanks for joining us on Close Up. We appreciate the time.
Thank you, Adam.
And we'll be right back with one of the Republican candidates running in the 1st Congressional District, Anthony DiLorenzo.